This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for June 5th through the 11th. This week, a fake news article helped shape the career path of a Hollywood actor. Censorship gets taken to the extreme. An album sells 20 million copies. And we say happy birthday to a Hollywood entertainment icon and also a music icon. This show goes more in depth about some of the events that we put on our daily podcast, the Music History Today podcast, which drops every single day, including weekends, wherever you get your podcast from. Now, on to this week's episode. In 1976, music and movie producer Robert Stigwood was looking for his next big hit. He had come off of making two successful movie musicals, Jesus Christ Superstar and The Who's Tommy. An article in New York Magazine caught his attention. It was titled The Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night by author Nick Cohen. The article told the story about a guy named Vinny and his buddies who were dancers at a discotheque in Brooklyn, New York, and who always dreamed of something bigger. Stigwood was hooked on the story and decided to turn the article into a movie. Vinny became Tony Manero. Stigwood got one of his old groups from his music producing days to do music for the movie, and then grabbed an up-and-coming actor from a television show, and then he released the movie. That movie, Saturday Night Fever, became one of the biggest movies of the year. It turned the disco music genre into a global sensation, the soundtrack into one of the biggest selling movie soundtracks of all time, the music group on the soundtrack, the Bee Gees, into one of the biggest groups of all time, and the actor, John Travolta, into an international superstar, along with getting him an Academy Award nomination for playing Tony. Now, this story would be pretty good right there, except that it's not the end of the story. In 1994, almost 18 years after the original magazine article came out, Nick Cohen fessed up. In an article in the Guardian newspaper, he admitted that he actually made up most of the article. See, he had just moved to New York City at that point in his life when he was hired to write the article, and he didn't know the neighborhood in Brooklyn well enough to know any of the guys there. The name of the discotheque, Odyssey 2000, was real, and Vinny and his friends were Italian, but that was all that was real about the article. In fact, Vinny was based on a guy Nick knew from his old English neighborhood back in the 1960s. So, you see, John Travolta and the Bee Gees owe their superstardom partially to fake news, which premiered in the June 7th, 1976 issue of New York Magazine. Also, a little bonus trivia for you. June 7th also plays very heavily into something else concerning John Travolta. On June 7th, 1972, the Broadway musical Grease premiered. When it was turned into a movie, Robert Stigwood was the producer again and grabbed the guy he had already made into a star, John Travolta, for the main role. The 1-2 punch of Saturday Night Fever and Grease made John Travolta into the hottest actor in the world. June 7th must be a pretty lucky day for Travolta. Next, let's talk about censorship. Censorship and music have been around since, well, music. As with a lot of art forms, the biggest fear is that when someone or some group decides to put their version of a moral code towards music, how far will it go? And what kind of damage will it do? Back in the 1980s, the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, forced the record industry to adopt a rating system. Anything deemed too mature for kids had a parental advisory sticker put on it. At the time, people feared that things would be censored to the extreme. On June 7, 1990, those fears became reality. In 1989, the Miami, Florida rap group 2 Live Crew put out an album called As Nasty as They Wanna Be. A song on the album, Me So Horny, began to gain some airplay on local radio, which did not sit well with one group. The conservative morality group, the American Family Institute, caught wind of the song and decided that not only was the song obscene, but that they were going to do something about it. A lawyer who worked alongside the group spoke about the album with the governor at the time, Bob Martinez, who got the local legal system involved, and finally Judge Mel Grossman ruled that the album could be considered obscene on June 6, 1990. Two Live Crew's Luther Campbell filed an appeal, and on June 7, 1990, Judge Jose Martinez ruled that the album was definitely obscene and was not covered by the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech for those of you not in the know. As he wrote in his ruling, quote, "The Philistines are not always wrong, nor are the guardians of the First Amendment always right," end quote. He further wrote that the album appealed, quote, "to dirty thoughts in the loins, not to the intellect and the mind," end quote. That's pretty much music in general. I mean, what did he think Frank Sinatra was singing about in Let's Go All the Way? Let's go all the way to the moon? But I digress. The judge ruling, which only applied to 3 counties in Florida, was extremely important. Not only did he make selling the album to a minor a felony, but you could actually be charged with a misdemeanor if you sold it to an adult. This ruling was put into effect and tested almost immediately. Only 2 days after Judge Gonzalez's ruling on June 9, 1990, a record store owner was arrested and charged with a felony for selling the album to a minor. The day after that, June 10, 1990, members of the Two Live Crew themselves were arrested for performing songs from the album in a nightclub. To be slightly fair to the police for 1 second, the police may have actually used the banned record to go after the record store owner, because a little while after they arrested him for selling the Two Live Crew's album, they arrested him again, this time for selling cocaine. The album was pulled from a lot of record stores, but as you guessed by now, the more the morality cops told people that they couldn't get the album, the more people became curious about it. Soon, the album started selling like crazy everywhere. Well, other than Florida, of course. The case started gaining publicity thanks to Miami radio stations talking about it, along with chat groups on something just gaining popularity at that time called the Internet. Remember, this was way before social media, people. Finally, 2 years later, a higher court ruled that the album was protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court let the lower court ruling stand. Two Live Crew were allowed to sell the album outright, and all charges against everyone were dropped. Here's the kicker to all of this. While this case tested the foundations of freedom of speech, the case helped the album, which in my opinion wasn't even all that good, really, into a 2 million copy seller instead of simply being a local Miami club favorite. Controversy does sell. I will admit, though, that while I'm not a fan of the album overall, Me So Horny is a pretty catchy song, not gonna lie. Bonus points if you figured out that the Me So Horny vocal sample is from the movie Apocalypse Now. This particular slippery slope of censorship started when a Florida judge ruled that the Two Live Crew's album As Nasty As They Wanna Be was officially obscene on June 7th, 1990. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you about our other podcasts. The Music History Today podcast goes over the daily events in music history and drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the Music Halls of Fame podcast, which talks about a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with other Music Halls of Fame's museums and walks of fame. The Music Halls of Fame podcast drops every Thursday and can also be found on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. Angus Young was born on March 31st, 1955 in Scotland. In the mid-1960s, his family moved to Australia in order to escape a brutal winter. There, he learned how to play the guitar. At the age of 18, he and his brother Malcolm formed a band. They named the band after something they saw on the back of their sister's sewing machine. In total, the group made 17 studio albums and a few live albums. They are one of the biggest selling musical acts of all time, having sold over 200 million copies worldwide. They've also made countless best artists of all time lists. The band started off with lead singer Bon Scott. Their first album, High Voltage, was originally only released in Australia. Their second album, TNT, had the song TNT, and It's a Long Way to the Top if you want to rock and roll. 1976's album, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, was when they became an international act. That album had the songs Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap and Jailbreak. Let There Be Rock came next, with the title track being released. Then came the albums Powerage and If You Want Blood, You've Got It. 1979's album Highway to Hell turned out to be the last one with Bon Scott as lead singer. That album had Girls Got Rhythm and Highway to Hell. In early 1980, the band finished their tour and started working on songs for their sixth album. On the night of February 19th, Bon went out partying in London, England. He had way too much to drink, and he went to sleep it all off in the back of a friend's car. The next morning, he was found unresponsive and rushed to the hospital. He was pronounced dead, the official cause, according to his death certificate, being, quote, acute alcohol poisoning and death by misadventure, end quote. The coroner also reported that it looked like he choked on his own vomit, which is never a good way to go. The band was devastated and thought about breaking up, but family and friends convinced them otherwise. They went searching for a new lead singer. Thanks to their producer, Mutt Lange, they found Brian Johnson. The band, with Brian in tow, decided to get out of London and record in the Bahamas. Nicer weather, less distractions, a good place to help the healing process. Oh yeah, and huge tax breaks. Don't forget about the huge tax breaks. The problem with recording was that they went at the beginning of hurricane season, which was particularly bad that year for the Bahamas, but got through it all they did. The band decided not to do any of the songs that Bon had a hand in writing because they didn't want to seem like they were profiting in any way from his death. The album ended up being a tribute album to his memory. The album cover was all black, in mourning to Bon. Their logo, though, had to have an outline around it, and that was because of a compromise with the record label, who originally objected to the all-black record. The album, now titled Back in Black, was released on July 25th, 1980. To say that it was a huge smash would be sort of an understatement. The album generated the classics Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, and Hell's Bells, which has a whole other story about how hard it was to record a proper bell sound. On June 7th, 2004, Back in Black became the seventh album to sell 20 million copies in America alone. It has now sold 25 million copies, making it the fourth biggest selling album in America, ranking behind two Eagles albums and Michael Jackson's Thriller album. It has also become the second biggest selling album of all time worldwide, with only Michael Jackson's Thriller album beating it out. For the record, only 12 albums at the moment have sold 20 million copies in America, and due to streaming, it'll probably stay that way for quite some time. The group, AC/DC. The album, Back in Black, hitting the 20 million copy sold mark in America on June 7th, 2004. Now to celebrate some birthdays for the week. First up, Miss Frances Ethel Gum, who was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, not Grand Rapids, Michigan, to parents who were vaudeville performers. Frances became part of her parents' act at the age of 2 when both her and her sisters sang as the Gum Sisters. The family moved to California when Frances was 4. It was there, while performing at the age of 13, that she was discovered by a big movie studio. She was put in a lot of films, most of them musicals. Then, after some trouble, she was let out of her contract with the movie studio. A famous Hollywood friend gave her a guest spot on his radio show, which opened up another avenue to her career, getting back on stage in front of a live audience like her childhood with her sisters. She started doing concert tours and nightclub acts. One of those shows went on to become an album, which is the first album by a female performer to win the Grammy Award. Frances is considered a true Hollywood icon who unfortunately had a stereotypical Hollywood story. Having fame never helped her low self-esteem. She abused drugs and alcohol throughout her entire life. Plus, she had suicide attempts, spent time in a sanitarium and a psychiatric hospital, had a bunch of financial issues, and multiple marriages. Frances passed away from an accidental pill overdose while in London, England. She was 47 years old at the time. Back to her career for a minute. While her concerts and recording career gave her new life, it was her singing in the movies that gave her the most fame. The movies that she sang in are considered classics: Meet Me in St. Louis, Strike Up the Band, and her movies with Mickey Rooney. By now, you must know that I'm talking about the woman born on June 10th, 1922 as Frances Ethel Gum, but better known by her stage name, Judy Garland. Oh, that famous Hollywood friend who helped her regain her singing career, that was Bing Crosby. Bonus point concerning Judy and June 10th. I purposely left her biggest hit off of her movie musical list because of the following bonus for this week. On June 10th, 2003, the musical Wicked debuted on Broadway. For those not in the know, Wicked is a hit musical about some of the characters in Judy Garland's biggest hit, The Wizard of Oz. I'm not sure if the musical was purposely opened on Judy's birthday or if that was just a weird coincidence, but there you have it. Finally, we celebrate the birthday of quite possibly the greatest pure musician of his generation. Prince Rogers Nelson was born on June 7, 1958, and was a product of musical parents. Prince's nickname was Skipper throughout childhood because he hated the name Prince. Prince also suffered from epilepsy when he was younger and often had seizures. The disease didn't stop Prince from being involved in sports, including playing basketball. He also studied ballet, which definitely helped with his dancing skills in his videos and on stage. Prince's parents divorced when he was 10 years old, and the rest of his childhood was spent bouncing around back and forth between parents and his new step-parents, much like children of divorce do. Prince also found himself gravitating towards music, having written his first song when he was 7 years old. He was rumored to have learned to play at least 10 instruments by the time he hit his 20s. By the time he was 19, Prince was signed to a managerial contract, and based on the strength of his demo tape, Prince signed with Warner Brothers Records and released his first album, For You, on April 7, 1978, just 2 months shy of his 20th birthday. A little over a year later, Prince released his self-titled second album, which had the hit I Want to Be Your Lover, and also had the song Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad. In 1980, he released the album Dirty Mind, which got him into some trouble with songs like Head. Don't know why that would have gotten him in trouble. Anywho, it also got him an opening act spot on Rick James's tour. 1981's album Controversy spawned the hit of the same name. Around this time, Prince started forming side projects like the group The Time. Prince's double album, 1999, was released in 1982 and had the top 10 hits 1999, Little Red Corvette, and Delirious. Little Red Corvette was helped from being one of only 2 songs from black artists that MTV was playing in heavy rotation when the music video came out, the other video being Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Still, 5 albums in 5 years was only the beginning. Prince was becoming a star, but he was about to become a superstar only 2 years later. After his 1999 album, Prince decided that he wanted to make a movie that was very loosely based on his life. He called the movie Purple Rain. This album was the second album to also credit his band The Revolution, as they did help to write some of the songs. Certain songs have a bit of a history. Let's Go Crazy is probably the best crafted song about moral ethics ever to be made. The line towards the end about how pills, thrills, and daffodils will kill is pretty ironic now, considering the way that Prince passed away. We'll get to that in a little while. The famous drum machine intro after the organs in the beginning of the song is Prince's go-to drum machine, the Lin LM1. Take Me With You was supposed to be for his side project Apollonia 6, but instead found its way onto the soundtrack. Contrary to popular belief, by the way, the female voice on the song is not Apollonia, and it is not either Lisa or Wendy from his band The Revolution. It is singer Jill Jones. Computer Blue was originally a 14-minute song, but got cut way back. I'm sure the original version turned up on the special edition of the soundtrack if it hasn't already. Prince played all of the instruments on The Beautiful Ones and Darling Nikki, along with When Doves Cry. For Doves, he was trying to go with a different sound, so he pulled the bass line out of the song. I Would Die For You, Baby I'm a Star, and Purple Rain were all actually recorded a year before. At a benefit concert for the Minnesota Dance Theater on August 3, 1983 at the now famous First Avenue Club, that was actually in the movie, Prince debuted those 3 songs as well as his new guitarist, Wendy Melvoin. The title track of the album has its own history. According to The Revolution's keyboardist, Dr. Fink, Prince wanted to write a song that sounded almost like it could have come from Bob Seger. The band Journey, however, tells a different story. According to them, Prince called them up one day and mentioned that he had written a song that sounded a lot like their hit song, Faithfully. He wanted their blessing, so of course they wouldn't sue him. Not only did they give him their blessing once they heard the song, but they thanked him for asking them, since a lot of bands had ripped off their sound without even asking them first. And if you actually listen to both Purple Rain and Faithfully back to back, you can kind of hear the similarities, especially in the chord progression. Purple Rain, the album, came out on June 25th, 1984 and spent 32 weeks on the Billboard Albums Chart's top 10, taking the number 1 spot for 24 straight weeks. Purple Rain made rumpled pirate shirts a fashion trend, along with being the basis for a famous Seinfeld episode. It gave Prince a lot of awards, including Grammys, a Golden Globe, and an Academy Award for Best Music Score. It is also considered a classic album and one of the greatest albums ever made. One of the songs off the album, Darling Nikki, was also the starting off point for that group we talked about earlier, the Parents Music Resource Center. One of the daughters of the future leader of that group was listening to the song Darling Nikki when the leader walked by and was so offended by the song that she started the group. The leader of the Parents Music Resource Center, Tipper Gore, who was the wife of then Senator Al Gore and the future Vice President Al Gore. Anyway, after Purple Rain in 1986, Prince started work with his group The Revolution on a couple new projects. The group was coming off a run where they had put out 3 albums in 3 years at that point. Purple Rain back in 1984, Around the World in a Day in 1985, and Parade in 1986. Parade was his soundtrack to his movie Under the Cherry Moon. They were working on a couple of new things. The first was going to be an album called Dream Factory. The second was going to be just Prince himself doing an alter ego named Camille, which was actually his singing voice sped up and pitched a lot higher. Something happened, though, along the way to doing all those albums, and Prince broke up the Revolution and then just got a new band. He continued work on his new album, still using a lot of the songs that he and the Revolution worked up. For some of the songs, he reworked the parts so that someone else could sing them. For a few, like Housequake, he kept the idea of using his alter ego voice. He had so many songs that he wanted to put out a triple album called Crystal Ball. His record label at the time, Warner Brothers, didn't like that idea at all, so everybody compromised and decided on putting out a double album instead. The album's title was also changed from Crystal Ball to Sign of the Times. The album Sign of the Times was released on March 30th, 1987 in England and March 31st in America. It spawned a concert film along with 3 huge hits, Sign of the Times, You Got the Look with Sheena Easton, and I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man. The album was a top 20 hit in 14 different countries, including America, where it hit number 6. It was the 47th biggest selling album of 1987, even though it wasn't a huge seller by superstar standards. It sold just over 1 million copies, but not much more, probably because it was a double album and thus priced much more than your standard LP record at the time. A lot of critics consider it Prince's best work, although I'm still kind of partial towards Purple Rain. After the success of Sign of the Times, Prince created new backup groups like the New Power Generation, another movie called Graffiti Bridge, a couple more albums that did pretty well, like Lovesexy, the soundtrack to Graffiti Bridge, along with the soundtrack to Tim Burton's 1989 smash hit, Batman. In the mid-90s, Prince had very public fights with his record company, with him first going by his famous symbol as his name, and then he left record label Warner Brothers altogether and started his own record label. Eventually, he went back to Warner Brothers, but it took a while. The 20th century was when Prince was a hit-making machine, and while he still put out albums, he wasn't anywhere as popular as his albums pre-2000. However, as the 21st century began, Prince became one of the most respected musicians along with revered status in the industry as a living legend. His 2007 halftime show at the Super Bowl, complete with rain actually coming down when he played the song Purple Rain, is considered the greatest halftime show of all time. During his surprise appearance at the 2015 Grammy Awards to present the Best Album Grammy, Prince was treated to an extra long standing ovation and cheers. He also had that blistering guitar solo that has gone down in history at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony as one of the greatest live guitar solos ever. One last thing that you may not have realized about Prince. Even though Prince was a fashion icon, that cane that he stylishly walked around with wasn't there for the look. Prince injured his hip from all that jumping around that he used to do on stage. He had surgery to repair his hip and had started taking painkillers to deal with the pain. As with a lot of people, he ended up addicted to the pills and put his health in jeopardy. On April 15, 2016, Prince was taken to a hospital in Illinois while on a private flight back home when he became unconscious. Once released, he went home to his mansion, Paisley Park Studios in Minnesota. He spent the next few days going around town, seeing a jazz performance, among other things, including riding his bike. On April 22, 2016, Prince was supposed to see Dr. Howard Kornfeld, who specialized in painkiller addictions, in order to have a physical exam. On the morning of April 21st, 2016, Dr. Kornfeld's son came by Paisley Park in order to give Prince a drug which aids in opioid addiction withdrawals. By the time the doctor's son reached the house in the morning, Prince was found unresponsive in his elevator at Paisley Park. It was the doctor's son who made the frantic phone call to emergency authorities at 9:43 a.m. Even though the ambulance got there in less than 10 minutes, they could not bring him back because Prince had actually been dead in the elevator for at least 6 hours. Prince was officially pronounced dead at 10:07 a.m. The official cause of death was an overdose of the painkiller fentanyl, which he was taking to deal with the hip pain. During an investigation into his death, authorities discovered that the fentanyl tablets were disguised as a generic form of the drug hydrocodone. Even though no criminal charges were ever brought concerning the illegal drugs, Prince's death, along with Tom Petty's death from painkillers in 2017, would help to put a public face on the dangers of painkiller addiction, especially concerning fentanyl and opioids. Prince's ashes are on display in an urn in the atrium of Paisley Park, which is now a museum, along with being a recording studio still. In his lifetime, Prince released 42 studio albums. Of those, 15 hit the top 10, with 4 of those hitting number 1. Prince also released 106 singles. Of those, 19 hit the top 10, with 5 of those hitting number 1. Prince was nominated for 32 Grammy Awards, winning 7 of them, 12 MTV Video Music Awards, winning 4 of those, 2 Golden Globes, winning 1, and 1 Academy Award, winning it for the movie Purple Rain. In total, he was nominated for 163 awards with 32 wins. He ranked 27th on Rolling Stone magazine's list of greatest artists of all time. He sold over 150 million albums. He's had albums put into the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry, and he has been inducted into at least 6 different Hall of Fames, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Happy birthday to Prince, or Skipper to his friends, June 7th, 1958. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for June 5th through the 11th. Thanks for listening.